For this week, we are looking at the topic of free speech on college campuses. And the material for this week's lecture comes from Louis Vaughn's chapter 16, so make sure that you read that chapter thoroughly as always before taking your quiz, because we're not going to be able to cover everything here in this lecture. Let's start with some background. So when we're talking about the issue of free speech, it's helpful to be aware of some common terms that come up when we're talking about this topic. One is hate speech. So hate speech is just spoken or written words that are used to insult, disparage, or attack people based on their social or ethnic group. And hate speech usually comes up when we're talking about potential limits that we might put on free speech. And so some argue that free speech is okay so long as your free speech doesn't devolve into hate speech. And so we'll talk about that idea here in a moment. Another is speech codes. So speech codes are campus regulations that ban the use of language or symbols thought to embody hate speech. And we'll look at that here in a moment as well. But let's, for a moment, think about what is the problem with free speech on college campuses, and where does this controversy come from? Well, the controversy really comes when you recognize that within a university, there are two moral goods that are crucial to higher education. The first higher moral good would be that of free speech, because free speech is what enables the expression of all ideas and the unfettered search for truth. And so if you have people within the university, professors, researchers who have differences of opinion on any topic, free speech allows both researchers to pursue the truth, to debate that their idea of the truth is right, to come into conversation with one another so that they can challenge each other's ideas. And then the hope is that through that process, through the free exchange of ideas, eventually the best ideas will win. Well, you can't have that if you don't have free speech. On the other hand, a campus environment is also supposed to be one that protects and respects the learning experiences of all students. And so if you want to create a good learning environment, you want it to be welcoming for all. And if there are students who feel that some ideas are insulting to them or offensive to them, that can create an environment that is not conducive to learning. And so that would hinder the purpose of the university if students don't feel welcome to be able to learn without being offended in the process. And so there are two competing ideas. And so one of the things that we have to think about in the controversy over free speech is how do we navigate these two ideas that can sometimes be in conflict with one another. And when we think about the problem a little bit deeper, it leads into a question: should there ever be limits on free speech? Well, let's think about ideological or political limits. So should there be limitations on conservative ideas that might be represented in the university? Should there be limitations on progressive ideas, Marxist ideas, fascist ideas, racist ideas? Should there be limitations on certain kinds of protests? And here I'm not talking about violent protests, but I'm thinking about protests that might be offensive to people, whether it's taking a knee during the national anthem. Should there be limitations on certain kinds of protests, burning of flags? Should there be limitations on anti-scientific ideas? Now, once you start talking about these ideas, I hope it will become clear on how free speech might conflict with creating a learning environment that is welcoming to all. So if you are somebody that is offended by Marxist ideas, and yet Marxist ideas are being taught within the university or being given a platform, so maybe it's not within the classroom, but maybe there's a student Marxist group and they want to promote their ideas on campus, and that is something that is offensive to you, well then that pushes against the culture that the university might try to create in making it an environment that's welcome for others. The same might be said if there are racist ideas being promoted on campus. And so if there was white supremacist student organization that wanted to start up on campus, should the university allow that to happen? Because that certainly would make it an environment that is not welcoming for all students. And so once you start digging into specific issues, it usually becomes clear on why there is a tension between the freedom of speech and expression versus creating an environment that is welcoming for all students. Now, we can dig into this even further when we talk about scientific ideas. So, should universities take a scientific stance on an issue? Now, the moment that you ask the scientific question, one of the things that's interesting with our culture now is that many scientific issues also become moral issues or political issues very quickly. And so the question then is, should the university take a moral or political stance on issues? Because oftentimes scientific issues, unfortunately, become moral and political issues as well. So take the debate in our culture over vaccinations. Should parents be required to vaccinate their kids? Well, one of the reasons why there's even a debate on that issue is because there's information in the culture against vaccination, arguing that vaccines are not helpful for your kids, and in some cases, people will argue that vaccinations lead to autism, and because that information is out there, it causes some parents to say, we don't think vaccination is right for our children, even if their medical doctors are saying the opposite. Even if the medical doctor is saying, no, you should have your children vaccinated, they think because of information that they've heard elsewhere, whether it's on Facebook or somewhere else, that they should not have their child vaccinated. Well, think about this in the context of the university. Should the university allow both sides of that debate to be promoted on a university campus? When the science is on the side of vaccines really do help, is the university required to then say, but we should still allow a platform for people to present an alternative perspective? This is very much a free speech issue once you start talking about this. Or more recently, in the world of COVID-19, debates over whether or not masks should be mandated or not. Well, this is not just a scientific debate right now, but this is also a moral and a political debate right now because of the political division that we have in our culture right now. So are masks something that are useful for students as well as the general community to wear to stop the spread of COVID-19? Or is this the new symbol of tyranny, as you see in the picture that you have on your screen? Well, these are debates that involve scientific issues, moral issues, political issues, and at what point is it appropriate, if ever, to put limits on speech? Now, once we start thinking about these issues, it becomes important for us to define, well, what then is free speech? Well, free speech is just the right to express your opinions or ideas without the burdensome restraints from government or society. Free speech, at least in our context, has been considered a moral and a legal or political value. The First Amendment enshrines the value in the U.S. Constitution, and most liberal democracies recognize their citizens' rights to free speech, to free expression, and usually this includes the right to speak, write, yell, act, paint, burn flags, carry signs, sing, and more. All of these could be expressions of free speech. And so if we ask, well, what is the benefit of free speech? There is an argument that comes up in your textbook, the famous argument by John Stuart Mill, who argues that there are three benefits of free speech that are worth considering. First, free speech and unfettered debate are vital for the pursuit of truth. And Mills argues even false ideas should be protected because that will allow truth to not become mere dogma. If you have true ideas, but those true ideas are never challenged, then, Mill argues, that just becomes dogma, it's unchallenged, and then that doesn't promote further understanding. And so that's the first argument that he presents for free speech. Number two, free speech is an essential feature of a democratic government. By allowing criticism and debate between candidates and the exposition of corruption and abuses by a free press, the government ensures fair democratic elections and efficiencies. And then number 3, he says free speech serves individual autonomy, which is necessary for a free and a worthwhile life. So now we could consider the other side of the argument, and that is what are the problems, potential problems with completely unfiltered free speech? Well, one of the big problems with free speech is that you open the door for hate speech. And hate speech can have negative effects. So hate speech can have an immediate negative effect on one's physiology. It can have longer-term negative mental and psychological effects. It can also have a lifelong negative impact on one's future capacity for success, as well as increase others' hatred and thus encourage violence and discrimination. And so, for these reasons, some have argued that the negative effects of hate speech outweigh any harms caused by unfiltered free speech. And so, really, this is an argument saying that you need to make a distinction between free speech and hate speech. And you can say, I am for free speech so long as free speech doesn't lead or devolve into hate speech. Well, now, if you do that, we could also consider, again, well, what are the negative effects on restricting speech on any level, even if you say that it's hate speech? Well, some worry that by having restrictions on speech, by calling it hate speech, that you're going to punish people for their political views, saying that these are hateful views. Maybe you're going to punish people who are not the intended targets of such restrictions. Or simply just the banning of unpopular ideas and views by calling those views hateful. And so some worry about that side of the argument as well. Well, that's all that I have for this week's lecture. Again, make sure that you read the chapter thoroughly, and if you have any questions, please feel free to email me.